Nobody expected Judge Morrison to smile when Lucky Luciano walked into his chambers that Tuesday morning. But there it was, a cold, satisfied grin from the most feared federal judge in New York. Morrison had been waiting 3 years for this moment. "Mr. Luciano?" Morrison said, not looking up from his mahogany desk. "I wondered when you'd pay me a visit." Lucky stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, wearing an expensive charcoal suit. His face revealed nothing, just the calm calculation that had built America's most sophisticated criminal organization. "Your Honor," Lucky said quietly, "we need to talk." Morrison looked up, steel-gray eyes gleaming. For 32 years, he'd been the judge who couldn't be bought, threatened, or intimidated. With Lucky facing a racketeering trial that could put him away for life, Morrison held all the cards, or so he thought. "Talk?" Morrison leaned back. "Your trial starts Monday. The evidence is overwhelming. Seems straightforward." What Morrison didn't know was that Lucky hadn't come to beg, threaten, or negotiate. He'd come to offer something no one had ever offered the judge before, something more valuable than money, more powerful than fear. Judge Harrison Morrison was 63, absolutely incorruptible, and from old Boston money. In 3 decades, he'd never taken a bribe or bent the law. His courtroom was where criminal empires went to die. Lucky represented everything Morrison despised, a Sicilian immigrant's son who'd transformed warring street gangs into a sophisticated business network generating millions annually. But Lucky understood something Morrison didn't: the difference between winning battles and winning wars. The conflict began in 1933 when Morrison targeted Lucky's operations with surgical precision. Within 18 months, he'd dismantled 40% of Lucky's revenue streams, sent 12 lieutenants to prison, and frozen over $2 million in assets. Other bosses would have responded with violence. Lucky chose a different approach. He studied Morrison like a chess master studies an opponent. What he discovered changed everything. Morrison wasn't just fighting organized crime. He was fighting his own powerlessness in a corrupt system. He watched politicians make backroom deals while criminals walked free, watched corruption flourish while he was limited to his courtroom. Morrison's crusade wasn't just about justice. It was about proving someone could still make a difference. Lucky realized the judge's greatest strength was also his weakness. Morrison was fighting chaos alone, using outdated weapons against an evolved enemy. That's when Lucky conceived his most audacious plan. Instead of destroying Morrison, he would make him a partner. The morning Lucky walked into Morrison's chambers, he carried documents that would revolutionize law enforcement. But first, he had to convince a federal judge to trust America's most wanted criminal. "Your Honor," Lucky began, settling into the chair without invitation. "What if I told you there was a way to eliminate organized crime permanently? Not just arrest people, actually eliminate it." Morrison's fingers stopped drumming. "I'd say you were lying or delusional. And if the plan required your cooperation, I'd call security." Lucky opened his portfolio and placed a single document on Morrison's desk. "Before you do that, take a look at this." Morrison glanced down at the paper, and his face went pale. It was a detailed organizational chart of every major crime family in New York. Names, positions, revenue streams, areas of operation. Information that law enforcement had been trying to compile for decades, laid out with corporate precision. "Where did you get this?" Morrison whispered. "I created it," Lucky said simply. "And I'm prepared to give it to you, along with evidence that will allow you to prosecute every name on that chart. Complete evidence, financial records, witness testimony, documentation of specific crimes. Morrison stared at the document, his mind racing. With information like this, he could dismantle organized crime in New York within 6 months. It would be the greatest law enforcement victory in American history. "What's the catch?" Morrison asked quietly. "No catch. You get everything you need to win your war. Every criminal you've been trying to reach, handed to you on a silver platter. In exchange for what? Your Honor, you've spent 30 years fighting organized crime, but you've never asked, what happens after you win?" Morrison frowned. "Crime decreases, justice prevails." "No. The power vacuum gets filled, maybe by street gangs that make us look civilized, maybe by corrupt politicians who steal more than we ever did." Lucky walked to the window. "You see disorder, but what you're really seeing is the absence of order. Remove one power structure, and another takes its place. The question isn't whether there will be power, it's whether that power will be controlled or chaotic." "Are you suggesting I should allow organized crime to continue?" "I'm suggesting you help me reorganize it." The words hung between them like a challenge. Morrison's worldview, everything he'd built his career on, was being turned upside down. What if organized crime wasn't crime at all? What if it was just organization managing activities that society wants but won't legalize? Gambling, liquor, entertainment, industries that generate millions and employ thousands. Those activities are illegal because politicians make them illegal, not because they're harmful. Prohibition created Al Capone. The law created the crime. Lucky returned to his chair. But what if we regulated these industries instead of prohibiting them? Taxation instead of confiscation. Licensing instead of arrest. Oversight instead of ignorance. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "You're talking about legitimizing criminal enterprises. I'm talking about recognizing reality. These industries exist whether you approve of them or not. The question is whether they'll be run by chaotic street gangs or by organized business entities that can be regulated, taxed, and held accountable." Lucky opened his portfolio again. "Here's my proposal. You prosecute the violent elements, loan sharks, extortionists, predators, but the legitimate business aspects, we bring them into the legal system." The documents outlined comprehensive plans for transitioning illegal operations into licensed establishments, creating regulatory frameworks and tax structures that would generate millions in government revenue. "This is insane," Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Your Honor, you've fought this war for 3 decades. The organizations are larger than ever. Violence has increased. Corruption has spread. Maybe it's time to try a different approach." Lucky leaned back. "I'm offering you the chance to be remembered as the judge who didn't just punish crime. He eliminated it. Not through force, but through vision." Morrison walked to his bookshelf, silent. When he turned around, his expression was unreadable. "And what do you get out of this, Mr. Luciano?" "I get to build something that lasts. Instead of looking over my shoulder, I create a system that doesn't need wars, based on cooperation instead of conflict. You get to become legitimate. I get to become irreplaceable." Morrison sat back down. This would require massive legal changes, congressional action, executive approval, cooperation from authorities, all of which you have connections to influence. When Harrison Morrison speaks about criminal justice reform, people listen. Morrison examined the final documents with amazement. "How did you obtain these?" "By understanding that power isn't just force. It's knowing what people want and giving it to them. Every signature on those papers wants to be part of the solution. They're waiting for someone to show them what it looks like. Morrison looked directly at Lucky. What you're proposing is either brilliant or completely insane. Maybe both. But insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly, expecting different results. You fought this war for 30 years using the same methods. How much longer do you want to fight it? After several minutes of silence, Morrison spoke. If I were to consider this, what would be the first step? Lucky smiled for the first time. Trust. You trust that I'm serious about making this work, and I trust that you're willing to think beyond the system that created both of us. Trust. Morrison laughed bitterly. You're asking a federal judge to trust a man who's broken more laws than I can count. I'm asking a visionary to trust another visionary, a man who wants to change the world to work with someone who knows how. Morrison turned from the window. Outside, 8 million people lived unaware that their future was being decided 30 floors above the street. My trial starts Monday, Lucky said quietly. You could sentence me to life, and nothing changes. The organization continues. Violence escalates, corruption spreads, or we write a different ending. Or justice doesn't just punish crime, it prevents it. The law doesn't just react, it solves. Morrison turned. This conversation never happened. Of course not. I'll need time to study these documents, consider the implications. Take all the time you need. But remember, every day we wait, more people die in unnecessary wars. More corruption spreads through systems that don't need to be corrupt. Lucky stood and straightened his tie. I'll be in touch. At the door, Morrison spoke again. What makes you think this will work? Lucky paused. Because I've already changed it once. I took warring gangs and turned them into a business organization. I ended blood feuds and created cooperation. I proved even criminals can evolve. He opened the door. The question isn't whether change is possible. It's whether it's inevitable. And the people who recognize inevitability first are the ones who get to shape it. Lucky walked out at 11:43 on Tuesday morning. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. Neither man spoke about it again. But 6 months later, Judge Morrison began issuing groundbreaking rulings that transformed how America approached organized crime. He pioneered cooperation agreements between law enforcement and reformed criminal organizations, creating the foundation for modern approaches to victimless crime. And Lucky became the first crime boss to voluntarily dismantle his criminal empire and rebuild it as legitimate business, not because he was forced, but because he understood the future belonged to those who could see it coming. Some called it the greatest crime prevention success. Others called it the most sophisticated con job ever. But everyone agreed. The day a judge and crime boss reinvented power's rules, the world changed forever. Lucky was right. Survivors aren't the strongest ones. They're the ones who understand that evolution isn't optional. It's inevitable.